Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chen and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Stars of Chaos Volume 2, also known as Sha Po Lang by Priest, and we'll be covering the last 3 chapters in Arc 5, Southern Bandits, so that's going to be chapters 43 through 45. Without further ado, I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 43, The South. The bandit chief Jingshu had accompanied the message-bearing Southern Border Army soldier to assist Chang, but as they rushed toward their destination, the veteran bandit sensed something was wrong. The group's leader seemed to be taking them down a path where the bandits often sounded the bells. There were many such places in the mountains of the southwest. The terrain was craggy, a natural maze, and any outsider who entered would soon find themselves hopelessly lost. A complicated series of tunnels spread in all directions below the earth, and once the locals went to ground, they could appear and disappear at will. The bandits often found ways to lure people into these twisted mountain passages, then hem them in and rob them. A robbery in such a place was a guaranteed success, and this tactic was well suited for countering certain famous armed escort forces and Jianghu sects. In the bandit slang, they called it sounding the bells. Jingshu may have been in a hurry, but his mind was clear. As they approached the area, he realized that this was one such bell jar. Cold sweat trickled down his back. He screeched to a halt and sent someone to interrogate the soldier leading the way. It only took a short exchange to find that this so-called soldier story was riddled with holes. Caught out, the soldier attempted to launch a surprise attack. The mountain bandits subdued him in a flurry of limbs, only for him to commit suicide by poison. Startled and suspicious, Jingshu ordered his subordinates to return the way they came. On the way back, they ran into one of their comrades from the stronghold they had just left, covered in blood. Only then did Jingshu learn that their lair had been demolished. By the time they rushed back in a panic, all that remained were broken tiles and crumbled walls around a ground strewn with burnt corpses. The work of 10 years had turned to ash overnight. Dagu! A distraught bandit staggered over and clutched Jingshu's arm. The tunnels! Don't panic. We still have the secret tunnels. The southwest was mountainous, and the bandits were like wily hares with 3 exits to their burrows. Many of them had excavated secret tunnels deep inside the rocky peaks, where they could disappear into the earth. If enemies fought their way up the slopes, the locals could vanish into the mountain ranges after a feigned attempt at defense. Even black hawks in the sky couldn't snatch a gopher in its burrow. The other bandit's eye lit up at this reminder. Jingshu swayed on his feet, face blank, without a single trace of joy. He watched his subordinates eagerly leave to search the tunnels, hoping for a lucky break. But he knew it was useless. If their assailants had only come to kill with swords and spears, the majority of the mountain's residents would have escaped through the tunnels, and the attack wouldn't have shaken the foundations of their stronghold. But they had burned the mountain down. Even Kuai-Lan too didn't know what he had sent up in this blaze. Jingshu stood frozen for a long time, until a shrill wail sounded from the direction of the tunnels. The people who had gone to search shouted in despair, "The tunnels have all collapsed!" The great bandit chief closed his eyes. Of course. Before this unremarkable mountain, hidden in the secret rooms, there was no gold or silver of the kind stored in Apricot Grove, but violet gold. Never mind the Southern Border Army, even the Black Iron Battalion struggled to make ends meet with the scant amount of violet gold they were supplied by the court. Chang naturally had his own black market suppliers. Kuai-Lan too had been tipped off that Chang and the great bandit chief Jingshu were close, but he didn't know that the Taoist priest Jingshu was the shopkeeper from whom Chang purchased his black market violet gold. A bandit's business was robbery. He never missed an opportunity to skim off the top. Jingshu was doing business with the black markets and smuggling violet gold for Chang. Of course he was getting something out of it himself. Jingshu didn't consider himself an avaricious man, so he kept only 1/10 of the goods with each transaction. Chang was well aware and had tacitly permitted him to continue. Shortly before this incident, Shu had delivered the latest batch of violet gold to the Southern Border Army. The 10th he kept for himself was stored in his hidden chamber below the mountain. Now, ignited by the fires scorching across the mountain, it had become the fatal blow that detonated the tunnels and killed every last soul in the stronghold. Was this a coincidence? How could it be a coincidence? Shu recalled something he'd heard long ago. The gentleman is moved by justice. The miscreant is moved by profit. Those who come together for the sake of profit will fall apart because of the same. He and Chang had come together for the sake of profit, and now that their unsavory business had come to light, Chang would abandon him without a second thought. The mountains were lousy with bandits, even if he discarded Shu. There were countless others he could patronize in his place. "Dage," one of the subordinates sobbed. "Let's dig out the tunnels. Maybe there's still some survivors?" Shu stood, silent, and shook his head. "Dage!" Cries and wails rose from all around. "That's enough!" Shu roared. The survivor standing on the scorched earth stared at him. "Come with me." His eyes gradually reddened, like those of a ferocious beast about to sink its fangs into its unfortunate victim. He lowered his voice and said through gritted teeth, "If Chang shows us no humanity, he can't claim I'm acting without justice. After so many years, he really thinks I'm defenseless against him?" Back in the bandit lair at Apricot Grove, Chang Geng was speaking. "The southern border has numerous mountains and numerous strongholds within them. The bandits do not each govern themselves, but follow an established hierarchy of order. As far as we know, there are 3 great bandit chiefs." Chang Geng produced a ragged sheepskin map and pointed several features out to Gu Yun. It was densely covered in complex notation that indicated the terrain, climate, types of road, what carriages could pass through each road, and all sorts of other information. Gu Yun had seen this kind of map before in Jiangnan. There was no mistaking it. It was unquestionably the work of the Lingyuan Pavilion. He considered Chang Geng with a pensive look beneath the lamplight, but said nothing. He signaled for him to continue. Gu Yun had planned for 3,000 Black Iron Battalion soldiers to disguise themselves within the southbound merchant caravans traveling the mountain roads. With a smoke signal as their cue, they moved secretly under the cover of darkness and dropped from the sky once Kuai Lantu's guards had trapped Chang on Apricot Grove's peak. Over 24 Black Hawks, aerial assassins, got the brawl on the summit under control, while black carapaces and black steeds split into 2 and divided the forces of the Southern Border Army at the foot of the mountain. The Southern Border Army had the advantage in numbers, but with their commander captured and facing the Black Iron Battalion in the flesh, Gu Yun rounded them up as easily as a flock of defenseless sheep. When a commander took a great army on the march not to slay his opponent, but to bolster his own courage, even if he brought an army of tigers and wolves, they would turn into nothing but a cartful of sheep in the end. Yet before the chaotic battle at Apricot Grove could reach its conclusion, Chang Geng relayed another piece of news. "Yifu, look. The factions of the 3 great bandit chiefs split the southern border into 3. They usually coexist peacefully, each keeping the bandits within their own territories in check, and all 3 have some connection with the Southern Border Army. The most notable among them is the Taoist priest Shu, whose territory is here, farthest to the north." "Why is this person special? Because he is the most powerful?" asked Shen Yi. "Or because he has the closest relationship with Chang?" "Because he smuggles violet gold for Chang," Chang Geng said quietly. Gu Yun's eyelid jumped, and his head shot up. "How do you know? Why did you come to the southwest?" 4 years ago, when the monk Liao Zhen lured him to Jiangnan, Gu Yun had already begun to harbor suspicions. The Linyuan Pavilion was embedded deep within the Jianghu and stood outside political affairs. It couldn't monitor every interaction between the highest officials of the court. They had likely discovered the dragon thread in the EC by tracing the civilian violet gold black market. Chang Geng smiled, but seemed unwilling to explain further. "The people of the Jianghu have their ways. Yifu needn't worry." Gu Yuan cut him off with a lift of his hand, face overcast. You know what sort of crime smuggling violet gold is under our laws. Getting caught means certain death. Everyone in the violet gold black market is one kind of desperado or another. Don't you know the saying, a gentleman does not stand beneath a crumbling wall? Listening from the side, Shenyi wished he could blush on Marshal Gu's behalf. Look how righteous he sounded scolding others, as if he had nothing to do with smuggling violet gold himself. Chang Geng didn't become upset or argue back. He merely looked at Gu Yuan with the ghost of a smile, the words, I know what you've been up to, but I won't expose you before an audience, written plainly on his face. Gu Yuan flinched in surprise. He instantly caught the meaning of that look. What? This little bastard is even investigating me now? Chang Geng pressed Gu Yuan's hand back down. Yifu, don't get angry yet. Let me finish. When Chang Geng laid his well-informed hand over Gu Yuan's own, his palm was warm and his touch gentle, as if he were holding a baby bird. He let go at once, but for some reason, the whole interaction felt strange. Gu Yuan was suddenly a bit awkward. Between close friends and brothers, embraces, joining hands, horseplay, even a kiss or two was unremarkable. Wait, what? Military officers didn't care for meaningless etiquette, and the rank and file cared even less. But this gesture was really too clingy. Guyon's fingers twitched, and he forgot what he was about to say. Chang Geng, seemingly unaffected, continued. Guchun sent me a message via wooden bird just now. Someone has burned down Jingshu's mountain stronghold. Guchun? Ah, Gupeng Xiao. Guyuan shot a look at Sun Jiao. Since the moment of Kuai Lan Tu's death and Fujicheng's capture, Assistant Minister Sun had turned into a pathetic little quail and forgotten how to do anything but tremble. Guyuan had set someone to guard him. The situation looked complicated at first glance, but with a few moments of thought, the whole unraveled. Fujicheng was aware of Guyuan's party's itinerary, so if he really wanted to clear himself of suspicion on the matter of colluding with bandits, there was no way he'd choose this time to act against Jingshu. Doing so would be the same as confessing that he was silencing witnesses to cover his own tracks. This fact, along with Sun Jiao's foolish confidence in the plot he had hatched with Kuai Lan Tu, made the truth clear. The Ministry of War wanted to advance the marching orders decree at all costs, and Kuai Lan Tu wanted to get rid of Fujicheng. Thus, the two joined hands to exacerbate the conflict between Fujicheng and the bandits and force the two parties into a cockfight right under the Marquis of Anding's nose. No matter how much Gu Yuan might want to protect Fujicheng personally, there was no way he could turn back into white when the truth was so stark before him. The cruel bastard who had set fire to the mountain was most likely Kuai Lan Tu, but there was no way Kuai Lan Tu knew the true nature of Jingxi and Fujicheng's arrangement. If he had, he never would have chosen to burn the mountain. Even if Fujicheng's collusion with bandits was made manifest, it might not be such a severe crime that the governor of the Southwest and commander-in-chief of the Southern Border Army would be condemned to death. If Kuai Lan Tu knew Fujicheng was using Jingshu to smuggle violet gold, he wouldn't rashly lend him a hand in destroying the evidence. Smuggling violet gold was treason, enough to send 10 Fujichengs to their death. The violet gold black market has 3 major sources, Chang Geng began. First, the official government stores. Even with the law as strict as it is, there are always profiteering rats willing to take the risk for personal gain. They steal from the official violet gold stores, then sell an adulterated product to civilians. The second are the black panners, the suicidal prospectors who travel beyond our borders to hunt for violet gold mines and risk death to extract it. The third comes from overseas. We have been investigating the third trail because this particular batch of violet gold originates in the foreign nations to the south. Gu Yuan sat up straighter. You're sure? Chang Geng nodded silently. Shen Yi's expression also grew grave. Everyone knew that the nations to the south did not produce violet gold. The foreign violet gold flowing into Great Liang's black markets came directly from far westerners, along set routes and through a set cadre of black market traders. The suppliers wouldn't complicate things by opening a side branch of this operation and passing the contraband through new hands. It was too risky. If there really was some interest using the southern nations as a screen while manipulating the Southwest's violet gold market from afar, those behind it almost certainly weren't taking such a great risk, nor concealing themselves so well, just to trade a few kilograms of illegal violet gold. Since the southern nations lie beyond our borders, our ability to intervene is limited, said Chang Geng. We've sent people south to investigate several times, but all have returned empty-handed. And that Taoist priest Jingxu, who has yet to show his face, is another wild card. Yifu, I doubt a vicious bandit who has gained access to violet gold is planning to cover the mountains with farming puppets and plow the wilderness into fertile fields. Guyuan pondered for a moment, then stood up and whistled. A black hawk circling overhead descended on silent wings and landed in front of Guyuan. A frown furrowed Guyuan's brow, and he issued 3 orders in quick succession. Take this map and dispatch 2 Black Hawk scout quadrants to locate the 3 great bandit chiefs on the southern border. We capture them first. Arrest the Inspector General of Nanzhong's guards and find out which lawless thug gave Kuailan Tu the brilliant idea to instigate conflict between Fujicheng and the bandits this way. Interrogate Fujicheng. Jiping, you take this one. After giving everyone their orders, Guyuan inadvertently squinted his eyes. Before even Shenyi could notice anything amiss, Chang Geng had already caught his arm. Yifu, did you bring your medicine? It's almost dawn. Maybe you should get some rest. Shenyi only realized what was going on when he heard the word medicine. He felt something about this was rather odd. It was as if Chang Geng's eyes were constantly glued to Guyuan, always alert to the slightest sign of trouble. Guyuan opened his mouth to deny it out of habit, but Chang Geng spoke first. I still haven't tried the acupuncture pattern Miss Chun gave me back at the inn. This incident may not be over yet. Yifu, you should let me help you, in case more trouble should arise. Only then did Guyuan recall that Chang Geng already knew. There was no point in hiding it from him anymore. He muttered, I'm going to lie down in the back for a bit, and allowed Chang Geng to follow him. Chang Geng kept an acupuncture instrument set, some common medical ingredients, a small quantity of silver pieces, and a few books in his travel bag. By now, Guyuan had discovered that however polished he looked on the surface, he in truth only had a few changes of clothes and simply alternated between them. Guyuan couldn't figure this kid out. As a kid, he had hated going outside so much that Guyuan had to deploy 18 different types of martial arts just to drag him to the market. Why did he now refuse to stay put in the capital, and instead insist on experiencing every kind of suffering the Jianghu had to offer? A month or 2 could be excused by novelty, but it was still a novelty after 4 years? Chang Geng had performed acupuncture on many people, but now that he was alone with Guyuan, he began to feel nervous. Not even when he had first learned acupuncture from Miss Chun by placing the needles in his own skin had he been so anxious. He washed his hands over and over, nearly scrubbing off a layer of skin, until Guyuan finally couldn't stand it anymore. After all this time, did Miss Chun only teach you how to wash your hands? Chang Geng swallowed, his voice slightly strained as he asked, careful, Yifu, do you mind lying on my lap? What was there to mind? It wasn't as if it were a girl's lap. So what if Guyuan lay on it? Guyuan very much wanted to ask, are you sure you can do this? He swallowed those words back down before they could leave his mouth, afraid to put any more pressure on his amateur physician. Adopting a carefree attitude, he thought to himself, here goes nothing. It's not like he can stab me to death. He had steeled himself to suffer a few jabs, but Chang Geng turned out to be far more competent than he'd imagined. He hardly registered the fine needles as they entered his acupoints. Soon enough, the familiar headache reared its head, but perhaps due more to psychology than physiology, it really did feel much better with the needles in place. Once Guyuan relaxed, he couldn't resist the urge to start rambling. You keep following the Lin Yuan pavilion out here into the wind and rain. What are you after? If Chang Geng wished to serve his nation, He ought to return to the capital and enter the court as a commandery prince. Why was an imperial scion running about investigating violet gold with the reckless Jianghu denizens of the Linyuan pavilion? Chang Geng paused before replying, though his hands continued to move, unfaltering, behind Gu Yuan. Finally, he chose a tactful way to decline the question and said, "I've never asked how Yifu got poisoned." Gu Yuan went silent. Chang Geng laughed, thinking he had managed to terminate that line of inquiry. But, after a moment, Gu Yuan said evenly, "When I was young, the Marquis took me to the battlefield on the northern border. I was nicked by a barbarian's poisoned arrow." Chang Geng was struck dumb. "There you have it. Now it's your turn." Gu Yuan was an accomplished actor, whether he was acting tough, acting incompetent, or acting ignorant. He would say his piece with a straight face, truths and falsehoods intermixed according to his mood, and, as for which was which, it was anyone's guess. Chang Geng could only rely on his intuition to warn him that Gu Yuan wasn't telling the whole truth. I wanted to venture out and see the world for myself," Chang Geng began. He hesitated, then continued. "Great Master Liao Zhen once told me that if my heart was as large as the world, worries the size of a mountain would be no more than a drop in the ocean. If I traverse the mountains, rivers, and oceans, see the great profusion of living things, and look often at other people, I will be able to look down and see myself. One who has never treated the dying with his own hands will see their own superficial scrapes as mortal wounds. One who has never eaten a mouthful of yellow sand will only see the brilliant gleam of spears and armored horses when they think of battle. And one who has never gnawed on empty husks complains of an imagined illness when they discuss the suffering of the common people." Gu Yuan opened his eyes and looked up at him. As the medicine took effect, his eyes gradually recovered their focus. Chang Geng's first instinct was to duck away. When he managed to compose himself and meet Gu Yuan's gaze, he still found himself unable to hold it for long. If he looked too much, an overheating gold tank would appear in his chest to bake and scorch him, sending a prickling warmth down his spine. He shifted his legs, struggling to sit still. "Your teacher's surname is Zhong. Zhong Chan, right?" Gu Yuan suddenly asked. Chang Geng started slightly. "The general of flying cavalry, whose horseback archery skills are unparalleled throughout the land. A dozen or so years ago, he was accused of defying the late emperor, but after civil and military officials up and down the court spoke on his behalf, he was spared the dungeons and merely dismissed from office. He disappeared without a trace. When the western regions rose in rebellion, the late emperor tried to restore him to his post in a panic, but he couldn't find him." Gu Yuan sighed. "The instant that arrow left your bowstring, I knew he had taught you. No wonder you lost every person I sent to tell you. Is the old general still in good health?" Chang Geng murmured in assent. Gu Yuan didn't speak for a long time. He didn't tell Chang Geng that long ago, Zhong Chan had been his teacher too. When the Linyuan pavilion introduced Chang Geng to General Zhong, had it been a coincidence or intentional? Gu Yuan couldn't help but feel a stir of anticipation. Could this little prince he had stumblingly raised from a child of scarce more than 10 truly grow into a pillar of the state? Gu Yuan drifted off to sleep amid his idle musings. On the foggy edge of consciousness, he seemed to feel someone gently touch his face. The next time he awoke, it was already bright out. He pushed aside the light blanket someone had draped over him and asked in a low voice, "What's going on?" "Sir," the Black Hawk standing by at the door replied, "overnight, the 3 great bandit chiefs gathered their forces and formed a rebel army at the mouth of Nandu River." Gu Yuan frowned. "They have about a dozen Parhelion bows and several scores of heavy armor infantrymen. If this subordinate's eyes can be trusted, and I believe they can, the rebels even have hawks." Chapter 44. A Contest of Wills. Now Gu Yuan was fully alert. "Hawks?" Gu Yuan asked softly. "You're sure there's no mistake?" This subordinate is willing to swear it on his own head. Hawks were unique among the 8 military branches. Although they didn't burn the most fuel, the maintenance and upkeep of their armor was extremely demanding. The Black Hawk Division required annual maintenance from a dedicated group of specialists within the Lingshu Institute, and when this was counted in the total, their equipment was no less expensive than heavy armor. In comparison, heavy armor was much more common. Each of the regional armies, and even Kuailantu's not-so-legal guard force, possessed a few suits. But across all of Great Liang, the only complete Hawk division was the Black Iron Battalion's Black Hawks. Where had these bandits gotten their hawks? Did they steal them from the Black Iron Battalion? Guyun rose and strode outside. The bandit nest at Apricot Grove was abuzz with anxiety, and Fujer Chang, stripped of his armor and trussed up like a chicken, knelt in its center. As soon as he spied Guyun, he began to proclaim his own innocence. "Marshal, Marshal, I've been wrongfully accused." Guyun kicked him square in the chest. The burly Fujer Chang flew backward and spewed out a mouthful of blood, then tumbled to the ground coughing, unable to get another word out. "Wrongfully accused?" Guyun asked, voice chilly. "You bastard. You've been raising a rebel army right under our noses. You've got the whole gamut, heavy armor and light pelts, a line of Parhelion bows 2 kilometers long. You even have hawks to deploy. You're a bigger spender than our Great Liang's Jiangnan Navy. Impressive work, Fujer Chang." Fujer Chang was in a sorry state, sprawled out on the ground, but the shocked expression on his face looked genuine. He continued to plead his case. "Marshal, I swear to the heavens, I have no idea where the Iron Hawks came from. Even my southern border army doesn't have hawks. Marshal, I'm telling the truth." "Sir," Shen Yi said quietly, "I spent all night interrogating him. General Fu can't fully explain the origins of the violet gold either. He only confessed to having Jingshu making the connections." "You fool. You were doing business with a tiger and you thought you were raising a house cat?" Guyun glared at Fujer Chang. "Continue the surveillance and bring me the map. Order all troops to get into formation and prepare to engage the rebel army. The Southern Border Army is temporarily under my command. Any who disobey orders will face a court-martial." He made to don his light pelt armor, but when he reached for his bow, his hand grasped empty air. Only then did he recall he had handed it over to the young prince. Guyun was still for a beat, then asked, "Where's Chang Geng?" At the same time, the great bandit chief Jingshu was racing through the winding mountain tunnels. Someone was waiting for him. The man was tall, with sharp features that looked, beneath the lamplight, as if they had been carved by a knife. Deep creases framed the corners of his mouth, but both his age and his nationality were difficult to judge from appearance alone. In any case, he wasn't from the Central Plains. His face was deeply tanned, every inch of his exposed skin weathered by the elements, and his eyes were faintly blue. At this moment, he was staring at an enormous tactical sand table. Jingshu was supremely cautious in his interactions with this man. "Master Jia, will Guyuan fall for it?" This Master Jia looked up at Jingshu. "You may be able to lure him here, but you won't be able to truly hinder him. The Marquis of Anding has been living rough on the battlefield since he was a child. He'll be able to tell that all your iron machines are far from capable of matching the Black Iron Battalion the instant he gets a good look at them." Jingshu froze. Then Master Jia lifted a finger to silence him. "Remember what I told you. The Black Iron Battalion was forged over 3 generations by exhausting the strength of your nation. It is one of the most advanced military forces in the world, a lethal weapon ahead of its time. Don't delude yourself into thinking you can fight them head on. This is as futile as an infant attempting to challenge a giant. What we are doing here is only temporarily luring the tiger away from its mountain lair and keeping it occupied elsewhere." As he spoke, he tapped a finger lightly against the sand table. "The hawks and heavy armor units we've waved in front of him will lure Guyuan to us. It may not stall him for long, but I just received a piece of news. Fujer Chang did you a favor. He brought the majority of his army to Apricot Grove, so defenses at the southern border garrison are weak. The ones left behind to guard it don't yet know you've fallen out with him." Jingshu's eyes gleamed. "Act like you are transporting violet gold for Fujer Chang as usual, but conceal your men out inside the violet gold shipping crates. The guards at the Southwest Supply Depot won't stop you, and they'll be discreet about your arrival. We coordinate our attack from within and without. Master Ja made a chopping motion with his hand, and we will have seized the Southwest Supply Depot in less time than it takes to finish a cup of tea. The Southwest Supply Depot held large amounts of violet gold for military use. If one person with a torch could manage to slip inside, never mind the Black Iron Battalion, even a deity descended from heaven wouldn't dare advance a step. Millions of kilograms of violet gold are stored there. If the warehouses should go up in flames, even the Marquis of Anding would be doomed by this crime of negligence. Mr. Ja lightly toyed with the gas lamp hanging above the sand table, and the reflection of its flame flickered in his eyes in the darkness. An unreadable smile crooked the corners of his mouth. You will have plenty of room to negotiate with the imperial court. Their plans were well laid. How could they know that another force entirely outside their calculations lay in wait within the mountainous terrain of the Southwest? Before the Black Iron Battalion could mobilize, a second wooden bird found Chang Geng within Apricot Grove. Chang Geng had released the first bird back to its sender soon after its arrival, and Shen Yi had failed to get his hands on even a single feather. Seeing a second one flutter inside, General Shun nearly drooled all over his clothes. He bounded eagerly up to Chang Geng, rubbing his hands together, and asked, "Your Highness, you see, how about I open this one for you?" Chang Geng readily handed it over. The craftsmanship of the little creature was so lifelike, one might confuse it for the genuine article. Even when he held it in his hands, the hardness of its wooden surface was all that differentiated it from a real animal. Shun Yi cupped this exquisite creation in his palms and felt that his heart was on the verge of melting. It could even nod and peck. Guyuan looked at him, incredulous. "Old maid, can you stop making a fool of yourself?" With the miraculous bird in hand, what was the Marquis of Anding? Shun Yi paid him no mind. He stroked the wooden bird's back with a drunken look of bliss on his face, then carefully felt for the catch on its belly. "All right, I'm opening it." "Wait, you have to shake." Before Chang Geng could finish, Shun Yi had already flicked open the latch on the wooden bird's underside. This delicate little creature was, in fact, booby-trapped, as everyone found when a wad of paper shot out with the force of a cannon the instant it was opened. The projectile struck General Shun right on the high bridge of his nose, nearly giving him a nosebleed, then proceeded to unfurl and plaster itself all over his face. Shun Yi couldn't get a word out. A sheet of paper large enough to cover an entire wall had been stuffed into the belly of this bird, which wasn't even the size of a person's palm. "You have to shake it first," Chang Geng was finally able to say. "The space inside the bird's belly is limited, so sometimes they use billow paper." "Oh, billow paper!" Shen Yi completely forgot the tears of pain still pooling in his eyes and embarked on a droning lecture, voice somewhat more muffled than before. "I know it. It's a type of paper made using a special technique. No matter how large the sheet, it can be compressed into a ball the size of a large pill without smearing the ink. It will even smooth itself back out after a time." There was not a thing in the world that could get between General Shun and his incorrigible addiction to lecturing. Not injury, nor nosebleed. Why didn't it smash his mouth instead? Guyuan thought to himself without a lick of empathy. He snatched the lethal sheet of billow paper from Shun Yi. It was the schematic for a suit of hawk armor. Every part was depicted in fine and accurate detail, from the wings to the gold tank, and even the visor and cuirass. The drawing was untidily signed with the character G. "These are the bandits' hawks?" Guyun was no artificer, but he had used all manner of battle armor as an extension of his own body and was intimately familiar with each of them. He could see the difference between the hawk armor in this diagram and the suits used by the Black Hawks at a glance. A shoddy imitation at best. Handcuffed protectively over his nose, Shun Yi leaned over to look. Compared to Black Hawks, they must have cut the weight equivalent of an entire suit of light pelt armor. It's probably to save fuel. Flying bamboo kites would save even more, Gu Yuan muttered. But before he finished this thought, a change came over his expression. Wait! This kind of hawk armor was no more than a useful shell, but its designer clearly understood the ins and outs of hawk armor. How could they not know this design was unfit for battle? Flashing hawk armor about so blatantly was clearly an attempt to lure a tiger away from its lair. But in that case, what exactly was the lair? When hunting a snake, one must strike 7 inches below the head to hit its weak point. But what was the southern border army, or even Gu Yuan's weak point? Gu Yuan spun around and stalked toward Fujicheng. Where do you have those bandits deliver the violet gold? Face covered in blood, Fujicheng stared blankly at Gu Yuan for several seconds. He seemed to come to some realization, and a hesitant look stole over his face, as if he wasn't sure whether he ought to answer. Wouldn't confessing to smuggling violet gold cement his crime of treason? Chang Geng spoke up softly from behind Gu Yuan. General Fu, think carefully. Inspector General Kwai is already dead by your hand. With Assistant Minister Suen of the Ministry of War to provide testimony, there is no question you will be condemned for armed rebellion. You're a dead man. Is there any difference whether you die in the capital or you die here today on this mountain? Fujicheng had never met the fourth prince. His glancing impression of the young man was that he was elegant, refined, and noble in manner, like someone who had never done a day of hard work in his life. But at this moment, he had not a sliver of doubt that if he did not cooperate, true to his word, this scholarly fourth prince would strike him down on the spot. Gu Yuan cut in smoothly. If you do the sensible thing now, you still have a chance to atone for your crimes with a good deed. Fujicheng's lips trembled. After a long interval, he began to speak in an unsteady voice. The Southwest Supply Depot. There was no secondary location. I always had Jingshu deliver the violet gold directly to the Southwest Supply Depot. I never brought a drop to my own estate. Gu Yuan's back shot up straight at once. Marshal! Fujicheng shouted after him. I may have committed murder, arson, grave robbery, every despicable deed under the sun, but I have always dedicated myself to my duty of guarding the southern border. I have never strayed in my loyalty. As far as I'm concerned, I've never done wrong by His Majesty, but this is how I am repaid. Who knows what my brothers and comrades will think when they hear the news? Or what you think, Marshal? Gu Yuan leveled him with a penetrating look. For a second, Fujicheng thought he had gotten through to him, but Gu Yuan was not moved by compassion, nor was he angered. It was as if his face was an impenetrable mask, impervious to howling wind and torrential rain. As he turned and walked away, he left only a few words behind. Is it any of your business what I think? Ping, go ahead with the Blackhawks. You must take control of the Southwest Supply Depot before the enemy arrives. Xiao An. The young Black Iron Battalion soldier who had tailed Chang Geng through Central Shu stepped out of the ranks at his call. Gu Yuan gave him his orders without a backward glance. Take a contingent of the southern border army and feign an attack on the peak where the bandits are gathering. Yes, sir. Wait, Gu Yuan continued. Paint their armor black. You can just splash it with some ink. It doesn't need to be wholly realistic, but be smart about it. He had learned this trick from Liao Zhen, of all people. Xiao An blinked in surprise. He swiftly caught the meaning behind Gu Yuan's order and happily ran off to comply. Elsewhere, the 3 great bandit chiefs of the southern border had just completed a head count of their subordinates. Jingshu looked at the silent mass of assembled bandits and felt a brief surge of pride, as if he were looking out over a proud army of thousands. He cupped his fists toward the sky and called out, The garrison armies of each region are glutted with iron armor and eminent in their prestige and power. The Black Iron Battalion descends from the skies like demon crows, and their incredible might is spoken of even across the seas. The strength of the Great Liang military is tremendous. Yet, in the space of less than a decade, Fujian and the Jiangnan Navy have both rebelled, one after the other. Why is that so? A fumbling ruler stands at the head of the nation and sycophants run amok. If not for this, why would common people like us need to fight with our lives on the line to court disaster like a moth flying into a flame? Today, we brothers have been forced into a corner. Our lives and livelihoods are as precarious as 1,000-pound burden carried across thin ice. To retreat is certain death. Unless we fight for our very lives, we have no chance of survival. I call on everyone here today to swear a blood oath, to join together in our common cause, to share joys and sorrows as one. Are you willing? The bandits had spent their lives thieving and looting. They could count the number of characters they could read on one hand. Thus, they were stirred up by Jingshu's impassioned speech, as if they could already see themselves standing among those nobles and ministers. Jingshu accepted a cup of wine from a subordinate at his side and drained it in one draught. He threw the cup down where it shattered against the floor. Win or lose, it all ends here. The bandits swallowed their liquid courage, then smashed their cups on the floor in a resounding avalanche of crashes. As they streamed into the sprawling network of secret chambers, Jingshu looked back at Marshal Jia. This mysterious outsider had been his contact representing the nations to the south when he smuggled violet gold for Chang. He was a shrewd man, and though of foreign origin, had resided in the Central Plains for an unknown number of years. Not a single ripple of emotion crossed Mr. Jia's face as he listened to Jingshu's rousing speech. The lamplight extended and deepened the creases framing his mouth, and as he stood half ensconced in shadow, he seemed to wear a subtle, mocking smirk. The first time Jingshu had skimmed his tenth off the top of Chang's violet gold, he had intended to sell it back through Mr. Jia in exchange for a pile of solid gold and silver he could sleep on top of every night. But since that first time, Mr. Jia had earnestly admonished him to keep the violet gold and transfer it to a safe location in small batches. Then Mr. Jia told him he could gradually amass armor and weaponry. Mr. Jia had even cautioned him not to store his armaments and money in the same place. Looking back now, it was as if this enigmatic foreigner had predicted the events of today long ago. The paranoid bandit chief Jingshu suddenly felt a niggle of doubt. Is this Mr. Jia really just the violet gold smuggler? Just then, a subordinate ran in with a report. Daga, we spotted men in black armor heading toward the area where the hawks are stored. The tendril of suspicion sprouting in Jingshu's heart was instantly drowned by a surge of glee. Mr. Jia had it right. They fell for it. Load the Parhelion bows. Every minute we can stall them is a minute more. Follow the plan. All troops move out at full speed. Quickly! Several kilometers away, a caravan transporting violet gold approached the Southwest Supply Depot, discreet and unnoticed. When it arrived at the gate, the man leading the caravan pushed up his bamboo hat to reveal his face to the captain of the supply corps. It's me. The fewer people who knew about the violet gold smuggling, the better. So the men sent by both sides were always staunch confidants of their leaders. The captain of the supply corps was the Southern Border Army contact for the bandits. Chang had given him strict orders to keep the violet gold deliveries he received a secret and to pull them off without a trace. As usual, the captain said nothing in front of his subordinates and waved them through with a neutral expression. He led the way to the violet gold storehouse as he had done many times before. But for some reason, after walking a few steps, the captain asked an unexpected question. Didn't you deliver a batch a few days ago? Why is there another one so soon? Face hidden under his bamboo hat, the bandit escorting the violet gold delivery replied huffily, That's the general and Dako's business. How should I know? The captain still felt uneasy. He dug for his keys and said, I'll be honest. Our general left with over half of our men yesterday. No one knows what's going on. The bandit with the bamboo hat watched impatiently as the captain moved to unlock the warehouse. He licked his lips and said, now brusque, We're all just following orders. We don't know either. Hurry up and open the door. The captain paused with the key in the lock. He frowned and turned back. Why are you being so... His voice died out. One of the bandits was pointing a small crossbow at his throat from 3 steps away. The captain took a breath of cold air and prepared to shout. The game was up. The bandits decided to go all in. At a wave of their leader's hand, the bolt leapt from the crossbow like a flick of a snake's tongue and buried itself into the captain's throat. The breath he sucked in never left his lungs. The bandit with the bamboo hat lunged forward, catching the captain's toppling body against his shoulder, and reached for the key still stuck in the lock of the warehouse door. His heart thudded as if about to beat out of his chest. Open this door, and he would hold tens of thousands of Southern Border Army soldiers and 3,000 black iron demon crows by the throat. Something screeched past his ear. Still caught up in the thrill of his imminent victory, the bamboo hat-wearing bandit turned to look, yet saw only the horrified faces of his subordinates. His arm felt a little off. He looked down. The hand that had closed around the key seconds ago had been shot through by an iron arrow striking like a bolt from clear skies, leaving only a flap of tattered flesh hanging from his arm. The bandit's severed hand remained clenched around the storehouse key, unable to turn it, yet blocking the way. An inhuman scream finally escaped his throat. Within this brief interval, the Black Hawks who had rushed to the scene dropped from the air. Shunyi, still holding his loaded bow, alighted on the roof of the violet gold warehouse and pulled out a black iron tiger tally. Dangling from a string below it, in a 2-in-1 deal, hung Great Liang's very first marching orders decree. Shunyi stood tall and graceful, the black wings of his hawk armor outspread behind him like storm clouds. He looked down on the dumbstruck garrison soldiers of the Southwest Supply Depot and called out, "The Black Iron Tiger Tally and the Marching Orders Decree are here. I come on the orders of the Marquis of Anding to take command of the Southwest Supply Depot and arrest these insolent bandits. The supply depot is now under lockdown. Execute these bandits at once." 3 bandit chiefs had no idea that, elsewhere, their plan had gone awry. They had split their forces in 3, and each led their own subordinates to burrow up from underground, rubbing their hands together in anticipation as they converged on the Southwest Supply Depot. Suddenly, Jingshu heard a crisp clack of metal on stone, as if some heavy object was rolling down the mountain, bouncing off the boulders as it went. He instinctively looked up. A human head, still clad in heavy armor, tumbled down the mountain slope. It was the very same suit of heavy armor they had hidden in the violet gold transport caravan to sneak into the Southwest Supply Depot. Jingshu froze. At some point, the Southern Border Army had emerged from the mountains to surround them on all sides, their numbers dotted here and there with the dark silhouettes of black iron armor. Before half of Jingshu's forces could emerge from the underground tunnels, a dense thicket of arrows had taken aim at them from the mountain peak. Chapter 45. Fuse. Guyuan granted Jingshu only the briefest glance before determining there was nothing much to see. He directly discarded this big bandit chief along with all the others. Right now, he was too busy fretting over what to do about Chang Geng. Fortunately for Guyuan, Chang Geng had mentioned his plans to meet up with his companions who had gone to investigate the bandits' secret tunnels at just the right time. He had privately heaved a sigh of relief. Guyuan had maintained a stern expression as he assigned a team of Black Iron Battalion soldiers to guard him and exhorted him to be cautious of straggling bandits. Only after personally seeing him off did Guyuan give an order to the black steed next to him. "Get some men to keep an eye on things. If His Highness comes back too early, find something for him to do. Don't let him come over here." The black steed left to execute his orders, and Guyuan turned back to the matter at hand. He swept a look over the captured bandit forces, an uncharacteristic gloom settling deep in his eyes. "I have just one question. Where are the entrances to your rat's nest? I'd like everyone to think carefully before you respond. How about this? Let's start with the person furthest to the west, and each of you can tell me the ones you know. Anyone who remains silent will be beheaded where he stands. Those who come later can add to what was said before. If you have nothing to add, then I'm sorry. The ones at the front of the line are getting off easy. So, let's begin. I'll count to 3. Anyone who doesn't talk loses his head. Anyone who babbles nonsense loses his head too. The captives were shocked stupid by this Marquis of Order who acted even more bandit-like than the bandits themselves. The black steed who had been ordered to conduct the interrogation stepped expressionlessly up to the westernmost bandit. The man instinctively looked left and right, reluctant to speak. Without the slightest hesitation, Guyuan made a chopping motion with his hand, and the black steed's wind slasher swung on his command. The black steed's usual job was killing on the battlefield. He'd never kept monkeys for slaughter, so he'd never really studied beheading techniques. The wind slasher cut through the bandit's neck, but unluckily got lodged in the man's spine. The bandit's head was only half severed, and his throat had yet to be slit. The blood-curdling screams caused every bird in the surrounding mountains to startle in fright. The black steed narrowed his eyes. With a second forceful tug of his wrist, he finally finished off that unfortunate soul. Blood poured from the bandit's neck like a groundwater spring, splashing all over the next man in line. The second bandit shook like an overload of gold tank, his mind going blank. He lifted a trembling finger to point at the exit behind them. "There's one right there." Guyuan sneered. "No shit. Do you think I'm blind?" Oh, sorry. A second head hit the ground. The third bandit had pissed himself in fright after seeing that half-severed head. He collapsed with a thud, clutching his head with both hands in case that black-armored butcher lost his patience and chopped without giving him a chance to speak. He proceeded to rattle off a dozen locations in a single breath as the captives lined up behind him, all but snapped his spine with the force of their glares. Now that someone had gotten the ball rolling, the rest was almost too easy. One choice spelled life or death, and there was no point in keeping secrets. Any information one guarded to their death, someone later in line would spill. Talking while one had the chance to cling to life was the sensible path. Guyuan's expression remained stoic, but he was inwardly stunned by the extent of the southern border bandits' network. Some of the entrances and exits the bandits revealed had been found by the Linyuan Pavilion. If they hadn't, even the Black Iron Battalion couldn't have ambushed these groundhogs so neatly. But the vast majority of them were unknown even to the experts from the Jianghu. The Black Iron soldiers behind him slipped away one by one to confirm the veracity of the bandits' information, leaving guards at each hidden entrance. In less time than it took to burn a stick of incense, the bandits had covered the entirety of this vast network of subterranean tunnels like passing a hot potato. Not a pebble of the mountain was left unturned. In the blink of an eye, this deadly hot potato had reached the instigator himself, the bandit chief Jing Xu. Over the course of his lifetime, Jing Xu had carved a bloody swath through his enemies, standing on a pile of corpses to declare himself king of his mountain. He had no extraordinary talents, but he had guts and ruthlessness aplenty. The tip of the soldier's wind slasher swung toward his face as blood flowed in rivers over the ground. He sucked in a deep breath, straightened his back, and gathered every ounce of fury that had brewed inside him for so many years, lashing it into a skeleton to support his body. He raised his ferocious, triangular eyes and stared at Guyuan, who had strolled up to him with his hands behind his back. "I heard it said that Marshal Gu is unmatched in elegance. I never imagined that you would be so adept at torture and interrogation. I see you've no lack of talents." "There's no need for flattery." An empty smile spread over Guyuan's face. "At its heart, the business of war is nothing more than chopping people down. I have neither shut you in a dark room, nor laid you over a bed of nails, nor have I offered you a torture rack for your seat. I can hardly claim any talents in torture and interrogation. If you have nothing to add, please be my guest in joining your comrades." Jing Shu's eyelids began to jump. "There are 64 entrances to our tunnels in total. They have already listed all of them, and the last few useless fools before me were clearly beginning to speak gibberish. Forgive my ignorance, Marshal Gu, but I don't understand your intentions." I have no intentions. I'm just asking for a little insurance. Guyun smiled. What if they miss something? Are you trying to convince me to chop heads more sparingly? You have plenty of people. Don't worry, I won't run out. Jingshu stared. After a moment's consideration, Guyun continued. But since they take you as their leader, perhaps you have more to share with us. Why don't you tell me something I haven't heard before? I'll count it as a pass. Jingshu clenched his jaw. He thought of that bastard Fujer Chung who had started all of this, and he wished he could flay the man alive. Marshal, you have any interest in hearing how Fujer Chung has been smuggling violet gold and plotting rebellion? An icy smile slipped from Guyuan's face. If I didn't know that much, how could I have guessed you would have had the guts to show up to the Southwest Supply Depot like lambs to the slaughter? I'll give you one more chance. Tell me something I don't know. The black iron wind slasher was right beside Jingshu's ear. He could feel the pitiless chill of the metal with the slightest twitch of his head. With a faint puff of steam, this wind slasher would lop his head off as effortlessly as a chef's knife sliced through a melon. Guyuan was cold and emotionless, utterly unaffected. Jingshu's head would roll to the ground with the unremarkable masses, coated in a layer of dust and indistinguishable from the rest. Jingshu finally yielded. What do you want to know? Guyuan waved his hand, and the wind slasher drew back a few centimeters. Who is your contact for the acquisition of foreign violet gold after it crosses Great Liang's southern border? Who told you to hoard violet gold and stockpile armor and weaponry? And who advised you on tactics and told you to hoodwink me with those bamboo kites so that you could seize the Southwest Supply Depot? Jingshu ground his teeth together. If I were you, I wouldn't give my life to protect that person. Guyuan took a step forward and lowered his voice. Just look at the web of secret tunnels behind you with its 64 entrances, Daozhang. If you people had nothing better to do than hole up inside them, even your Taoist deities from the highest order of heaven couldn't dig you out. So, who was it that encouraged you to assemble the forces of all three peaks just so we could sweep you all up in a single move, Guyun was an expert at passing black off as white. He developed 3 special skills over the course of his lifetime: warfare, calligraphy, and prevarication. His tongue could turn a castle in the air into something far too real, and on second thought, his words made far too much sense. Jingshu broke out in a cold sweat. It took Guyuan longer to interrogate this bandit chief than it took Chang Geng to find his companions. He returned with them in tow straight away, but was stopped by a dutiful Black Iron Battalion soldier before he rounded the last peak. The young soldier wasn't much good at lying, so he simply repeated what Guyuan had said. Your Highness, the marshal would like you to rest here for a while. Chang Geng was unsurprised. He obediently hunkered down to wait without inquiring further. Chang Geng hadn't seen Guyuan in person for the last 4 years, but under old General Zhong's instruction, he had studied every battle Guyuan had ever fought, every change in his political stance since he had been bequeathed the title of Marquis during the late Emperor's reign, and even the development of his calligraphy. If Chang Geng were to walk into Guyuan's study today and pull an old document at random, he would be able to guess the approximate age Guyuan had been when he penned it. This was a far more effective method of understanding Guyuan than hanging around him every day just to listen to him brag about the flower of the Northwest. The instant Guyuan had flicked him that first hesitant look, Chang Geng knew he was planning to force a confession and didn't wish Chang Geng to see. After all this time, Guyuan still instinctively tried to preserve his precarious image as a compassionate father before Chang Geng. Chang Geng himself had no objections. He treasured this bit of unspoken care his young godfather afforded him. 2 figures followed close behind Chang Geng. These were the 2 snot-nosed kids who had left Yanhui town with him for the capital so many years ago, Ge Pengxiao and Cao Nyangzi, though they were now called Ge Chun and Cao Chunhua. In his youth, Ge Chun had been an endearing and chubby little kid, Now grown, he was no longer chubby, but tall and sturdy, fit to be called a burly giant on account of his frame alone. Unfortunately, the head that sat atop his broad shoulders looked as if it had come from the wrong set. He had a fair and round little face, two trembling mounds of tender flesh piled up on his cheeks like soft tofu, framing his small nose, mouth, and eyes. The whole picture gave him an air of harmless honesty. Cao Chunhua had experienced an even more drastic transformation. Whether he willed it or not, his body had grown into an adult man's frame. It was no longer so easy for him to pull off the seamless androgyny of his youth. He had no choice but to reluctantly admit he really was an icky man and start wearing men's clothes again. However, he insisted on giving himself the name Cao Chunhua. No one aside from him could explain how spring water was any better of a name than lady. "Why do we have to wait here?" Cao Chunhua asked, craning his neck. "It's been years since I've seen my dear Marquis. I've been looking forward to it so much I haven't slept in days." Chang Geng shot Cao Chunhua a cryptic glance and marked a strike against him on his mental tally. Once he had marked down 50 such incidents of infatuated nonsense along the lines of, "My dear Marquis," from this person, he'd find some plausible reason to give him a sound beating. Blissfully ignorant, Cao Chunhua asked another question. "Daga, once you get back to the capital, you'll receive your title of nobility, right? I heard the late emperor had the Prince Yanbei estate prepared for you long ago. Are you planning to move there or stay in the Marquis estate?" Chang Geng flinched in surprise. He smiled with some effort and said, "That depends on whether the Marquis is willing to keep me or not." Thinking back now, Chang Geng could no longer recall how he'd screwed up the courage to drop everything, to leave the Marquis estate and Guyun. It was easier before their reunion, but their unexpected encounter in Central Shu felt like a head-on collision with fate. He'd struggled to gather the same resolution a second time, even on the pain of death. Chen Qingxu always told him, "Compose yourself, curb your delusions." This advice was fairly effective in preventing the Wu-Er-Ge from flaring, but a person's emotions were all interconnected. Suppress fury and resentment, and joy would also fade into a shadow of itself. As time went on, an individual who continued to smother their strong feelings would pale like a plant grown away from the sun, able to survive and make do, but at the cost of nearly all its color and vibrancy. Chang Geng had thought he was on the verge of attaining Buddhahood until he reunited with Guyun. Chang Geng spent his days with Guyun hard at work, fighting rebels one day and bandits the next. Yet he was suffused with a baseless and irrational happiness, an effervescent, anticipatory, and ardent sort of happiness, as if he opened his eyes every morning knowing something he'd been looking forward to was about to happen. He felt this way even though he knew there was no such thing. The Wu-Er-Ge still visited him in his dreams every night. If he received his princely title, would Guyun let him stay? Rationally speaking, Guyun would of course allow him to stay. The Marquis estate would be willing to keep him at least until he officially settled down and married. And if he never married, perhaps he could be a bit shameless and freeload indefinitely. Now that was too beautiful a fantasy. It took all Chang Geng's strength to prevent a dopey smile from breaking across his face. After about 30 minutes of waiting, Guyuan showed up in person. The secret tunnels were like an enormous spiderweb spreading in all directions, bound by an intricate geometry of interconnections. Guyuan had chopped over 40 heads in all. Excluding the rambling drivel of the ones who had been frightened to tears, he had uncovered 64 entrances. Guchun was shocked to hear this. "What? The two of us brothers roughed it in the mountains for half a year and only found 30-some entrances. How did you get over 60 in one go?" "Without the intel you provided, I couldn't have ambushed them, much less interrogated them." Guyun gave Guchun a look. He resisted the urge for several seconds, but, in the end, fell to temptation and beckoned him over. "Come here." Thinking the marshal had some important instruction to impart, Guchung bounded directly over to Guyun. The Marshal Gu, who had been so serious just a minute ago, thrust out his hand and pinched Guchun's chubby cheek. This man suffered from a chronic and terminal case of itchy hands. Whenever he saw something with an appealing texture, he couldn't help but grab a handful of it. He had been wanting to do this for ages. This is the best. Guyuan squished Guchan's face for a while, then thought to himself, his cravings still unsatisfied. How did he cultivate these? Guchan didn't know what to say. Cao Chunhua stared with such envy his face could practically pierce through stone. Emotion flowed from his covetous tiger-like eyes, and he whined softly. The Marquis is playing favorites. Why doesn't he pinch my cheeks? He was too afraid to say this to Guyuan's face, so Chang Geng was the only one who heard him. Strike number 48. Cao Chunhua shuddered. He glanced around, suddenly feeling an ominous premonition of danger. Guyuan drew a map of the secret tunnels through the mountains according to Jingshu's testimony and ordered his men to fan smoke into every entrance. They smoked the tunnels out for 3 days, turning the mountain into a chimney until every bat, rat, and poisonous insect had packed their bags and fled. But still, the man Guyuan wanted to capture did not appear. Several soldiers bravely volunteered to enter the tunnels carrying ropes to aid their way back. They searched the 64 entrances from dawn till dusk, but found neither hide nor hair of the man. Their only reward for their exploits was the sand table Jingshu had mentioned. On the 4th day, one of Guyuan's subordinates reported that, in the course of their investigation into Kuai Lan Tu's associates, they had indeed found a suspicious figure. The man was a visiting dignitary under Kuai Lan Tu's employ who went by the name of Wang Bufan, or Wang the Extraordinary, clearly an alias. This person rarely showed himself in public, but Kuai Lan Tu's close confidants all understood that Kuai Lan Tu admired and trusted him greatly. He even provided the man a courtyard in his own estate and sent him some of the most valued servants and prettiest maids to serve him. And where is this extraordinary one now? Guyuan asked. He ran. All the servants in his courtyard were found dead, poisoned. By the time the other members of the estate discovered them, the bodies had already grown cold. Sir, another cavalryman arrived with a report. We searched the hideouts Jingshu confessed to using to transport violet gold. They were all cleared out. Whoever did it didn't leave behind even a single sheet of paper. Guyuan silently turned his worn prayer beads in his hands. These incidents, Kuai Lan Tu's mysterious visiting dignitary, Jingshu's Mr. Jia, looked like coincidences. But Guyuan's intuition told him there was something more here, in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had a nagging feeling that there was some grand plot unfolding just out of sight. The shadowy figures who had ignited the volatile situation of the southern border worked from behind the scenes. They had appeared out of nowhere and disappeared without a trace, and both their identities and goals were a mystery. They seemed to be an enemy, yet, via a series of even more coincidences, they had helped him deal, in short order, with quite a number of the people standing in his way. Guyuan wasn't entirely sure whether he had thwarted their schemes or fallen right into their trap. The individual Guyuan was digging up every centimeter of mountainous terrain to find was currently standing on the deck of an unremarkable little cargo ship sailing the South Sea. Mr. Jia had changed back into his intricate Western clothes and was at this point looking down at a small scrap of sheepskin. Across it spread a map of the vast terrain of Great Liang. He raised a pen dipped in red cinnabar ink and drew a small red circle in the area that represented the southern border. Including this mark, the map contained 3 red circles in total. The other 2 lay upon the northern border and the East Sea. Mr. Jia's pen hovered over the map and landed at the entrance to the Silk Road in the west. Now, the stage is set. Mr. Jia began to chuckle. All that's missing is the fuse. Once the fuse is lit, with a roar, Wang Bufan, who might have passed for a person of the Central Plains in appearance, finished for him. A great inferno will consume the Central Plains. The 2 looked at each other and laughed, then clinked their wine glasses in a toast. When news of the crisis on the southern border made its way back to the Son of Heaven, he was naturally enraged. He ordered Gu Yun to escort the bandit chiefs and traitor general back to the capital without delay. Thus, Gu Yun was forced to set aside his suspicions for the time being and speed north. However, when he thought about how his darling godson was finally willing to go home with him and how the Marquis estate would become lively once again, he began to look toward his return to the capital with some anticipation. He's much more charming now that he's grown up, Guyuan whispered to Shun Yi like a proud old father. But he's gotten so mature and sensible all of a sudden. I can't quite get used to it. Huh, how shameless, Shun Yi succinctly assessed and got swathed as expected. Speaking of which, he continued, you've arrested Fu Zhicheng. So what do you plan to do now? The playfulness slid from Guyuan's face. He was quiet for a time, and when he spoke again, it was with a serious expression. Jiping, there's something I've often thought these last few years. Isn't it a waste of talent for you to follow me around all the time? Shenyi glanced at him in silence. You are learned in both ancient history and current affairs, with literary talent enough to enter the Hanlin Academy and martial talent enough to pacify a region. You spent so many years submerged in the Lingshu Institute and the Black Iron Battalion. It's about time you stepped out of my shadow. Even though Chang Geng had analyzed the situation for him, Shen Yi was still moved by these words from Gu Yun. The two were comrades as well as friends, and although theirs was a life and death bond such that they would entrust their widows and orphans to each other, Gu Yun had a dog's mouth that could never manage a sincere word. He had not once straightforwardly commended Shen Yi to his face. Shen Yi's eyes stung. Zushi, honestly, you don't have to. Besides, I owe you an apology, Guyuan added, earnest. With a natural beauty like me hanging around, your chances at romance have been thwarted. After all these years, you're still single. Truly, I can't be sorry enough. Shun Yi was speechless. His tiny quota of serious words for the day fulfilled, the self-styled natural beauty had returned to spouting absurdities. Shenyi hastily shoved the heartfelt reply still stuck in his throat back down into his gut and spurred his horse forward with a scoff. Chang Geng watched him depart from a short distance away. He promptly took the opportunity to gallop over and fill Shun Yi's vacant spot, riding shoulder to shoulder with Gu Yun. What did you do to make General Shun lose his temper again? Gu Yun rubbed his nose with a faint smile. Seeing that a leaf had become stuck to Gu Yuan's light pelt armor, Chang Geng reached out and plucked it off. Ever attentive, he said, Yifu, even the lightest armor weighs over 20 kilograms. Why don't you take it off and give yourself a break? Gu Yuan had no objections. He allowed Chang Geng to help him unbuckle the light pelt armor and remove the pieces one by one. Perhaps they were riding too close. For some reason, their horses decided they liked the look of each other, and the two began to nuzzle amorously together. Gu Yun spared a hand to tug his horse's head away. Don't be such a scoundrel. The vambrace on his arm was half removed, and with this flick of his hand, the whole piece nearly went flying off his wrist, dragging something out of his sleeve along with it. Chang Geng was quick to react and caught the falling object. It was a crude wooden flute. At first, neither realized what had happened. Chang Geng wondered, why is he carrying around a shabby little flute? Gu Yun was still confused. What was it that just flew out? Their gazes landed simultaneously on that weathered bamboo flute with a cracked foot. Chang Geng suddenly felt that this flute was a bit familiar. Gu Yun, meanwhile, reacted as if he'd been struck by lightning. He remembered now. This item had been acquired through dishonorable means. They moved at the same instant. Gu Yuan's hand shot out to snatch it, while Chang Geng instinctively tightened his grip. Their hands both clenched around the bamboo flute, froze in midair. Can't I see it? Chang Geng asked innocently. What's there to see? Gu Yuan yanked the small bamboo flute from Chang Geng's grip and shoved it back up his sleeve, which only served to call more attention to himself. Chang Geng had rarely seen Gu Yuan act so guiltily. He unexpectedly recalled that day in Jiangnan 4 years ago, and Commissioner Yao's little daughter sobbing with heartache. A vague understanding dawned on him, yet he didn't quite dare to believe it. He asked, obliquely, Did someone give it to you? I carved it myself, Guyuan lied without a hint of embarrassed blush or nervous breath. Oh. Chang Geng blinked. After a beat, he remarked casually, I didn't know bamboo grew in Lolan. Guyuan did not reply. Chang Geng blinked slowly once again. His gaze appeared to flicker. He said in a low laugh, Yifu's craftsmanship is rather crude. Why don't I carve you a better one sometime? Guyuan was utterly unable to defend himself, fatally embarrassed, and absolutely certain the kid had seen through him and was having a laugh at his expense. But his theft of the flute had been too egregious. He had no way to exonerate himself. His only option was to take his loss like a defeated hero, tuck his fluffy cotton tail between his legs, and make a run for it. Chang Geng didn't chase after him. He stayed in place and savored the aftertaste of this incident for a long time, rather tempted to laugh again. He mentally staged the scene from beginning to end once more. Guyuan sneaking into the little child's courtyard at the break of dawn to steal a bamboo flute. His heart burst with blossoms of joy that stayed vibrant the rest of the day, their color only fading when the sun tilted toward the west. The lingering fragrance of those blooms shoved the wu'er ge into a tiny corner in his heart. As their falling petals dyed the river below red, the seed of an idea sprouted into a winding network of branches. Why did he keep it all these years? Since he had it with him, did he take it out to look at it from time to time? When his little Yifu looked at this flute, would he think of Chang Geng? Did this mean that Guyuan was more fond of him than he thought? And in that case, how far could he push his luck? Could he get even closer to him? The faint scent of Miss Chun's pacifying fragrance drifted from his sachet. Chang Geng stared after Guyuan. Chun Qingshu's "Let nature take its course" echoing through his head. He was on the verge of being incinerated by those words. He didn't dare allow his fantasies to get too out of hand. But as he clung uneasily to that tiny possibility, it clawed at his heart and insides, gnawing him down to his core. The journey to escort prisoners up north should have been bitter and long, but perhaps because of the Black Iron Battalion's rapid pace, or perhaps because Chang Geng desired so much to delay their arrival, they came to the capital before midwinter. By now, the Southern Border Rebellion, which had stunned both court and commons, had touched off a seismic explosion in the depths of the capital. Sun Jiao returned to the capital half dead. After suffering shock after shock, he had fallen ill and wound up confined to his bed. Even the Longan Emperor never expected that his maneuver to push through the marching orders decree would actually incite the commander-in-chief of the Southern Border Army to rebel. Stunned and furious, he ordered a thorough investigation. The implications of this case were widespread, and the Ministries of Personnel, Justice, and War, the Imperial Court of Judicial Review, and even the Supervisory Commission were all on high alert. Guyuan got no rest during his rare return to the capital. Instead of enjoying a break from military duties, he was summoned into the palace every few days for questioning. The evidence was clear. Chang, governor of the Southwest, had colluded with bandits, murdered an appointed official of the court, smuggled violet gold, and plotted rebellion. Every bandit chief and the leader of the rebel faction was sentenced to capital punishment in quick succession, and their families went to the execution block with them. The merciless and iron-blooded Longan Emperor refused to stop there. Just as an uprooted radish brings up the dirt it grows in, the investigation soon implicated all around the accused, even members of the Central Six Ministries. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Anyone who had close personal ties with Chang, any who had accepted bribes to open back doors on Chang's behalf, and even the old ministers who had recommended Chang for his position long ago were all guilty by association. Not a one escaped punishment. Some were imprisoned, others were dismissed from their positions. A terror settled over the imperial court, and the entire capital city was engulfed in the oppressive gloom of paranoia and suspicion. The skies remained overcast until the turn of the year, when a great snowstorm finally blew down from the heavens. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of chapters 43 through 45, which also concludes Arc 5, Southern Bandits, and I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the level of heaviness and lightheartedness that was within these chapters, giving it a beautiful, perfect balance of that. So fun. So some of the things that I just wanted to say is number one, I absolutely love Shun Yi's enthusiasm for gadgets and everything. I think it's so adorable. And I think Shun Yi is actually an adorable person. And I just knew the first time that bird was mentioned, I knew it was Good Pong Xiao. In my heart, I just knew it. And so it was nice that it was confirmed because I was also wondering for these pages, like, where are Good Pong Xiao? And I guess Sao Nyangza. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention is I absolutely love the way Priest described simpletons. And on page 117, I'll just reread it really quickly, where it said, the bandits had spent their lives thieving and looting. They could count the number of characters they could read on one hand. Thus, they were stirred up by Jingshu's impassioned speech, and as if they could see themselves standing among the nobles and ministers. That was just funny to me. I was like, huh. I love the way you just describe people as simple without directly saying they were simple or, unknowledgeable. That was really nice. And then the last thing I will say to you, Chang Geng, yes, your Yifu is very fond of you. More fond than you know. He just has a harder time showing that fondness, okay? But anyway, that's all. I hope you guys enjoyed these 3 chapters. It has been a little bit easier for me to read them. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. So hopefully, I can start getting back to normal sooner than later on reading a little bit more or even posting videos a little bit more, but we'll see. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and 我爱你们.